This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 399, Working Remotely. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today we're talking about working remotely with Alan Sherry and Jordan Graham. Alan is a backend developer at Atten Design Group for the last 5 years, working with Drupal for 14 years, and working remotely for 12 years. Jordan is a senior developer at Atten Design Group, has been working with Drupal since 2011, with Atten Design Group since right before COVID started. He's the father of 2 adult daughters, and he is getting married in 2024. Jordan and Alan, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM, and today my co-host is Nick Laughlin, founder of Enlighten Development.
Good morning. Good morning. Happy to talk about this topic. It's something I've been doing for a long time as well.
Alrighty. Before we jump into our primary topic, let's bring in Martin Anderson Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and maintainer of a growing number of modules of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, John. This week, I thought we would talk about OEmbed providers, which extends Drupal's ability to embed content from third-party websites. It's a module that was created in April of 2020. The current version is 2.1.0, which is ready for Drupal 10. It is actively maintained. In fact, the last commit was in the last 2 weeks. It only has 8 open issues, 3 of which are bugs, which is pretty impressive considering it's in use by 4,265 websites. It was created by Chris Burge, and he continues to be the maintainer. Now, the module works by giving site builders the ability to configure additional OEmbed providers. Out of the box, Drupal core supports YouTube and Vimeo, and other modules are able to sort of add individual OEmbed providers like Instagram. Now, as an aside for anyone who's not familiar with the term OEmbed, it's an open format designed to allow embedding content from, that third-party website into a web page. And by default, the way this module works is it pulls a list of providers from oembed.com, but that can be customized if there's another list, even a custom list that you'd prefer to use. It also allows for defining custom providers. The module exposes an alter hook so that if you want to sort of modify an existing list to work better with your particular website, you also have the ability to sort of do that at a code level. The 2.x branch of this module also introduced a concept of buckets as a way to sort of group providers together. So as an example, to have all of the video providers grouped together as well. Now, Nick, I believe you have some firsthand experience using this module. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I explored this module quite a bit when as I've been rebuilding the Talking Drupal website. So we currently don't use OEmbed for the audio embeds. So I wanted to explore setting that up to work with Libsyn, which is the kind of, I guess it's the CDN that we use for the podcast. One of the nice things about this module is there's kind of 2 sides to it. One is you have the ability to kind of use a checkbox to enable a bunch of different OEmbed providers that Chris has kind of set up the integrations for. I think there's a list of like 50 or 60, if I had to guess. There's a ton. But it also has the ability to allow you to add your own custom providers without code. So you can kind of just go in there and say, this is my provider URL. This is what I want to embed. Unfortunately, Libsyn did not work, and Chris was very helpful in the issue queue, kind of helping me debug that. And it turns out that Libsyn doesn't have valid OEmbed, doesn't follow the spec properly, so it doesn't work. He gave some pointers, but I think ultimately I'm just going to wait for Libsyn to support it properly. We'll just continue embedding the content the way we do. But he was really responsive. It's a great little module if you need to embed stuff that does support the OEmbed spec properly. I would definitely recommend it.
Awesome. In terms of that process of kind of OEmbed, I mean, I'm sure lots of people have used YouTube or Vimeo embeds. Has anybody had other experiences in terms of using OEmbed in Drupal beyond sort of those basic kind of core supported elements?
The only other one I've done is, and it was kind of a roundabout way. It didn't quite follow. It didn't use this module, but that was SoundCloud, which again, it's pretty straightforward. You just, you know, the idea behind it is that the system knows how to format whatever you're embedding, and you don't really have to worry about it. So it's pretty powerful.
I think in the past I've used a couple of modules that did like individual social channels, so Instagram, and I think maybe the other one I'd used was Twitter. But as you say, it's pretty powerful to have a module like this that can easily allow you to add them in bulk as well.
I'm interested by this because in the past, have had notoriously bad luck with Instagram content and being able to add that to my personal website. I'm using like a service right now to just pull it in kind of manually. But I'm wondering from like a user perspective, right? So I install this module, I, add the Instagram, embed endpoint. Like, what do I then get from that? Do I just get like media items that I can then add to content, or is it like, is it like feeding in data? Like, how does that typically work?
It's not a feed. It's going to allow you to manually drop in a piece of content, just like you do with YouTube. Like Core supports YouTube, but it's not going to like pull in
Okay.
something automatically. You can just go to a YouTube video, copy the URL, paste it in, and it will work. The
I
same
got
thing
it.
for Instagram.
So in the Instagram scenario, it wouldn't automatically pull in my stuff. It would just provide me the ability to basically pull my stuff in from Instagram and say, "Hey, here's a photo from Instagram," and add it to a post or something like, or a view or something like that. Got it. Okay. That makes sense, I guess.
I would imagine you could probably use it with feeds to ingest the URLs and then have this basically do the embed to, put that into your content. But
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You see, yeah, that makes sense. Cool. That's super interesting. Martin, again, another very interesting module that I now am going to have to go try to figure out how to use in my own projects and personal stuff. So, thank you for that. All right, let's jump into talking about remote work or working remotely. Um, so I think the we're going to frame this a little bit, right? Because our last show about working remotely, or well, it was actually titled "Remote Work" with Kaleem Clarkson. It was about 2 years ago, I think. It was episode 308. There'll be a link in the show notes for that. And in that show, we talked a lot about um, kind of like the corporate governance around remote work, and it was kind of like we were framing it in the aspect of like, hey, should companies let people work remotely and whatnot. Here, I think I'd like to focus a little bit more on maybe like the developer experience to remote work, seeing as we have two developers with us today, and and kind of focus more on why remote work is great, or why remote work is hard, and kind of dive into those aspects and see if we can kind of maybe provide some tips and tricks for folks that are maybe new to remote work, that might have some problems with it, and then we'll see where the conversation goes. So my first question, I'm going to ask both of you this question, but I'll start with Alan. Alan, why do you think remote work is great? Why do you enjoy it?
So yeah, got asked this question quite a bit over the years. I'd have to say my immediate reaction is always objectively, it's not great. It really depends on the person, depends on what you're doing. For me, it actually changed a lot about my life, I guess. I didn't seek out remote work originally. I had worked in an office for a few years. I had just started Drupal, and then I found myself kind of in the Drupal realm. Like I wanted to work more with Drupal, but like I'm from Connecticut originally, and all the jobs at the time were Java, ASP. I don't think I was ready for Java, and I hate ASP, so it just didn't work out. Like the job I found that was a really good fit was a company in Oregon. So that's I mean that's what I did. Like it gave me the ability to work for a company I wanted to work for. That was a good fit. That's I think the primary reason why remote work, in my opinion, is great. And I
without
guess
having to move to Oregon, right?
right, yeah. And then I didn't even think of travel. Like it was kind of a faint dream. Like I always wanted to, but I never thought about it. But then after a while, I started working remotely for a while, and it just, my partner at the time kind of made things happen. Plus, she was going to move. Like she said, "I'm going to leave Connecticut. I'm not staying here." And I was like, "Huh, all right." So I kind of just moved because of that. But then, it became a thing, and I love travel, and it became a big part of my life.
So you kind of,
So
fair to say, it sounds like you kind of fell into it, and then you realize it kind of like got your brain going and thinking of all the different benefits that you could take advantage of by working remotely.
definitely, it took a while, but like once I settled in, I realized, yeah, I want this flexibility. I don't think I'm going to go back, to be in
Interesting.
an office.
And about how long ago was that? When did that start for you?
So it's basically my entire life of Drupal, which is 12
Okay.
years. 12,
Okay.
14 years I've been technically in Drupal, but 12 years I consider myself actually, working for Drupal companies.
So that's interesting. So way before like a pandemic was even a thought in anybody. Well, I'm sure it was a thought in somebody's head, but widely
I
a
mean,
thought in somebody's head.
exactly. So this was back when remote work wasn't really like, it was still weird. People didn't think of it as really an option. And both the company, I've only worked for two companies since then because I've stayed with them until the end. Because like, you, if you can pick any company around the world or wherever, it doesn't matter location, you could stay with a company that's a good fit.
Let's pivot to Jordan. And again, Jordan, the question is, why is remote work great?
Think remote work just gives you back a lot of your life that otherwise you would be spending commuting. And it's, there are a lot of people that accept as a part of their lives, 45 minutes in the car each direction. I had that when I lived in Chicago,
Mhm.
and that's your life that's ticking by and doing something that's not particularly rewarding, commuting. So, I mean, if nothing else, giving yourself that extra bit of your life back every day, that makes a huge difference. So that's my favorite, like the easiest, lowest hanging benefit of working remotely.
Super interesting because when I used to work in an office setting for a company in person, I guess you could say, right? I used to find that my commute was like my time to decompress, my time to kind of think of things, my time to practice my presentations, my time to listen to podcasts. So I always felt like that was, I didn't necessarily feel like it was wasted time. It was time that was like kind of like a time I'm in a car all by myself. Like I can find something to do. But I will say that now that I work remotely, uh, that that thinking has kind of changed for me. I guess I don't listen to as many podcasts as I once did, or as regularly, I guess I should say. But yeah, that's super interesting, and I can see a lot of people like if you had like an hour long commute, I could see that being there. Rather have those 2 hours doing something else, right?
When I have that time back in my life, like I can go for a run, a bike ride, I can go for a swim at my lunch, and
Yep.
all those things that you're talking about, problem solving and letting the creativity come when you're not focusing on the work. That can happen in other environments in addition to one's car. So yeah, there have been years that I've worked in agency settings when I've gone into an office, and a bike commute is great. That's my favorite
Mhm.
way to get to work if weather permitting. But so the same idea though. In other words,
Yep.
give me that time back in my life, and I can still do all of those sort of practicing and problem solving things. It's just not necessarily in frustration of traffic.
Yep. Yeah, I can definitely understand that. once I started working remote, I saw a lot more benefit in like, hey, I used to take half an hour to get to and from the office. Now I can go pick the kids up at school, or I can get started on dinner, or it's like something, I can do, be more, maybe more productive.
Mhm.
Alan, were you going to jump in and say something there?
I was gonna say that's always why I say it heavily, heavily depends. So like if you're the type of person that is going to use that time, and honestly, sometimes it even depends on how long you're working remotely. In the beginning, I thought, yeah, this is great. I have extra time. After a while, I thought, why? Why am I going to go for a run? I don't have to go for a run. Why am I going to go for a walk? I don't have to. Like, uh, unfortunately, sometimes you find your day just starts later until you actually have to be at work, and then there's no real, like, distinction as to when you're done and when you start, and the day just sort of spreads longer and longer and longer, and that's a psychological battle I think a lot of people go through, and it depends on the person. If you're a very organized, scheduled person, I think it'll be a lot easier for you, but if you're not, if you're like me, it's gonna be very tough to divide the 2 and to know when you're in work mode and when you're not in work mode, and you really kinda have to have outside influences that pull you away. Like, it's gonna help to schedule something at 5 or 6 so that it pulls you away from your desk, which is next to the living room, and now it takes you away. Otherwise, it just the line just kinda blurs. Especially if there's a time zone difference too, that's gonna definitely be a wrench into the situation. I remember my first remote job, I wasn't outside the US, I was just in Connecticut, and the company was in Oregon, and so then my day started at the, 9 o'clock their time was 12. All that meant was now I'm sleeping until 11:45, and then my day ends at 8. Well, my girlfriend at the time, that didn't work for her, like, it she doesn't
Yeah.
want the evening to start at 8 o'clock, so it becomes, kind of more of a burden than it does, a convenience. I loved it, but, like, depends on your social life, depends on what you wanna do, depends on a whole bunch of other things.
I I think that's interesting. And before we dive into the difficulties, I mean, I have clients I'm in Massachusetts. I have clients in Portland as well, um, and I have kind of the opposite reaction. I mean, I still start my day at 8:39, and I finish my day at 5, and that means that we don't have that full overlap for those particular clients. But it also means that if they send me something at the end of the day, I can have it done before they start their day the next day because I have 3 hours in the morning before they come on. But I think there's a few other really big benefits for remote work other than just the commute. Because it's been a really long time since I've had to commute. I've been working remotely for 15 years. I think there's a few other really big benefits, and that is I had a client that would insist that I go in a few times a year, which is fine to kind of meet and greet, but they also would want me to work there for a day. And one of the biggest things that I realized is when you're in an office, you don't have very much control over interruptions, right? Whether it's somebody coming to ask a question specifically or just coming to say like, "Hey, how you doing? How's your weekend?" Which is fine. That's, that is one of the benefits of working in person, but it's also it's a distraction too. When you work from home or you work remotely, you have a lot more control over those types of distractions because you can put your notifications on pause if you need to focus. But you also have the inverse. If you need to take a minute to get up, I mean, I guess um, this is the example you always hear, but if you need to like change a load of laundry or start the dishwasher or something, and that's helpful not just to get those chores done, but if you're focusing on a really difficult problem, you've been spinning your wheels for 45 minutes, sometimes just taking that 30 seconds to like focus on something completely separate is helpful for your job, but you're also getting something done that you need to get done anyway. And if you're working in an office, you can't do that. You can't just be like, okay, I'll be back in an hour and a half. I'm going to go change a load of laundry and then come back and be like, okay, now I figured out what the problem was. Right. But if you're working from home, you can do that. And
Also, it's funny, like, I know nobody wants to admit this, but, if you want to take a 15-minute nap, which we all admit that we've done it at least one time in our lives, you can. You can if you work from home, and that's way better than any type of stimulus that you're gonna try to get.
Mm.
yeah,
Like, that's
Mhm.
gonna make you way more productive in the rest of the day than any sort of lunch break or whatever you can do in an office, and nobody's gonna take a 15-minute nap in an office. You're gonna feel very
Yeah.
awkward.
I will adamantly disagree with you. I worked in an office. We had a couch, and at that point in time,
That's an office
um,
culture.
I had a coworker who would every so often go and take like a 15-20 minute nap on the couch.
That's because
You
they
know,
don't
there's
snore.
a there's an
That's why.
agency in Denver. There's Spire Media. At least used to have a nap room downstairs.
Okay.
So it was built into the culture. But and Nick, thanks for reminding me. I do have a load of darks that I need to change, but I'll wait until we're done recording today.
Oh, don't let us stop you.
um,
Productivity.
there's another couple of things that come to mind too. Like I work from home, as mentioned, but my wife recently started working remotely too. And it's been nice to be able to have lunch with her. I mean, we can't every day, like when we're recording. I think she's probably eating lunch right now, but we can usually coordinate that, which is nice. Okay, we've talked about some of the benefits, and I think you started alluding to some of the what some people think or what some people point to as things that can be negative. But what other things can be hard about remote work, especially if you're thinking just starting out, something you haven't done before? What are things to be aware of, Jordan?
I think, Alan talked about the importance of having some discipline that an office environment will impose on you, and working from home. I think it's really easy. I think there's some personality types like myself that it's hard for me to stop working. It's hard for me to say that's the end of my workday, and I'm going to turn away from it now and focus on family or myself or something like that. So it's easy for people to lose themselves. But I think the biggest disadvantage of working remotely is the lack of like you really have to have a company culture focused on building community and building connectedness, because we can slack each other all we want, but it's not the same as hey, I'm going to go grab some coffee, you want to come with me, or go grab lunch together. The face-to-face meetings, planned or incidental, that goes a long way toward building a corporate culture of cohesiveness. And so that's one of the things that you can really miss out on. And there's some companies that don't place a premium on building that with a distributed workforce, and it just feels disconnecting.
Yeah. I I think that's probably um one of the biggest detractors, I think, that I hear is that loss of culture or friendship or kinship, that you kind of build with coworkers when you see them every day. Um, I think you pointed out something that's really important, Jordan. It's a corporate culture thing. It's a solution that needs to come from the top down. I've seen a few. I think Lullabot has talked about this a bit, but they do a few things where they have, obviously in-person retreats are important, that kind of thing. But I think you can also do it with things like periodic hackathons or things where you're working on things together that aren't necessarily work oriented because it allows you to build those um, relationships. Um, I mean, personally, I mean, I definitely consider myself. I consider some of my clients friends. I think it might be a little bit different for me though, because even though I am remote, I'm not an employee. I don't. I work for myself, so I think there's always been a slight separation there. And for me, that's always been something that I have to be mindful of. Like, how do you build that contact? How about you, Alan? What do you think? What else do you think is difficult about remote work?
One thing for me is I'm very introverted, and so I never realized how hard it is to reach out for help when like I'm just at home and there's nobody else around me. I know. So with that, and I've gone to the office. Actually, I used to go pretty frequently to the office a few times a year, and then also I did work in an office for a few years, a long time ago. So I know that like you're sitting in an office, it's very easy to say, "Hey, can you how do you do this?" And then they just walk over. But when you're at home and everybody else is at home, it feels more formal. It's like a formal request that you have to message somebody, you have to start a Zoom message, and it depends on the person, right? So some people are very fine with that. They're just like, hey, let's hop on a Zoom call. I hate doing that. Like, it's not me. I'm not one to easily jump on a Zoom call, especially when I've spent the whole morning not even talking to anybody except for the cat. Like, I'll 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 struggle with it. I'll struggle with it, and then I'll have to be like, okay, fine, let me reach out to somebody. So it's a struggle every time.
Have huddles helped with that at all
I haven't even
in
tried
Slack?
them.
Okay, because I haven't explicitly talked to other people about it, but I've heard comments about. I mean, I've used huddles with some people in Slack. People, our listeners that aren't familiar with it, it's a feature that was added, I think, about a year and a half ago. But it's just a way to like really quickly jump into a voice call with somebody. And some companies use them more than others. So I was just curious about that because it's not really like, oh hey, how you doing? Okay, let me set up a Zoom call and then set this up. It's like you just click a button and you're in a call with them. I'd be
I should
curious if
give it a
that's
shot,
something more.
honestly. Although the end doesn't, I don't think we've really dove into that yet. But I kind of, I've found what works for me is to schedule a message. So it's no pressure. I can always undo it. But if I schedule the message, I'll probably
Interesting.
forget about it and then it gets sent. So that usually
Mm.
helps quite a bit.
Mhm.
It's like, I
Interesting.
know it'll go out there, it goes to the person. And what I do is that I usually schedule it for the next morning because I have very weird hours. Even for when I'm working on the same time zone, I still have very weird hours. So if I schedule it for the morning, it's kind of like a double win because it goes to them in the morning, they respond in the morning, and it gives me motivation to actually go and start my day because I'll probably
Mm,
have to have a meeting. So
interesting. I that's an interesting solution. I'd also like to kind of pose a couple of tips. I think for the first thing that you brought up too, which is the scheduling stuff. And I think you mentioned this too, Jordan. One of the things that I always tell people that are looking to kind of start a freelance business or start working remotely is that the first few months your schedule is going to be crazy, right? Your productivity is probably going to be a little bit lower because you're just not used to that cadence. You're not used to the ability to kind of get up and take a nap or go change a load of laundry or get lunch where, whenever you want. Like it takes some time to get used to that. But one of the things that you should do is make sure you have a dedicated space for your office at wherever you're working from. Having a place where like this is work, and the ability to kind of leave that place when work is done. I mean, some people work differently. So if you're somebody who just works on your laptop and likes to move around the house, that's fine. But I think in the beginning, especially for me, it was really helpful to have this is my office section, even when it was just a small section of the bedroom before I had space for an office. Having that kind of dedicated place that I can leave helps provide that uh
Separation,
split, that separation. That's the word I
right?
was looking for. Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no worries.
and that separation helps with the scheduling as well, right? I mean, of course, sometimes I do work a little bit later, but you know, my clients know that I generally end between 5 and 5:30.
I can get behind that. So like recording today, I'm recording from my office, right? And I don't know, I kind of have like a mix of both of those things because like I typically use my office for work, but I also, sometimes will come in here if I'm working on, an open source thing or some sort of personal project, and like it's kind of like just a quiet space, right? For me, it has a door, which I think is kind of important. One of the things I think that I don't know that anybody's brought this up, but one of the things that can make remote work hard is if you have small children or you have a noisy environment that you're trying to work in. I think so many thoughts actually, but the one I'm focusing on right now is that I think the pandemic's kind of normalized the fact that everybody has interruptions, right, and that those things kind of happen. But if you can have a quiet space, I think that's good. And then I think the schedule thing is important as well, right? So like most of my team is in Europe, so like I typically start a little bit earlier because I'm East Coast U.S. So I usually start at 8, and then work until 4 or 5, depending on what's going on and whatnot. But once the kids kind of get home from school, that's like a natural stopping point for me. So I'm like, all right, well, let's stop there and like move on to family time, making dinner and stuff like that. So yeah, if you can craft your schedule to kind of have those natural breaking points, that's helpful. And I think it's also, there's also something, I think one of the nice things and one of the hard things are kind of the same thing sometimes. Like sometimes you can get distracted by the fact that there are things in the house that you need to do, right? So like if you're, it's nice to be able to say like, oh, I got to go change my laundry or put my laundry in or do this load of laundry, right? But then it's kind of also like, okay, well, now like I'm in the middle of something. Oh, wait, I got to go do, flip that laundry. Oh, wait, I got to go, do this thing. So you definitely have to be able to, as Nick said, like manage both aspects of like being home and being working. Yeah, I think that's all. You guys have all raised really, really good points. One thing, because Alan is actually coming to us from France right now, so there's a little bit of an international flair here. I'm wondering how working remotely internationally, like how that impacts kind of working remotely and like what's involved in that, right? So I imagine like a couple of things that come to mind are like if your organization or your client is not in the same time zone, like that can be a little bit difficult. Sometimes there are international laws that you have to kind of like follow. I'm wondering, Alan, specifically, if you've seen any issues with that, or there's anything that somebody might want to think about before they decide to just pick up their laptop and go work from some great location like France.
Oh yeah. So I worked from a lot of different countries. If you're just traveling, and generally if you're just in a location for maybe a month or two, it shouldn't have any, implications, but it highly depends. So before you just pick up, go stay in another country, you have to read the laws in both countries. How long you actually stay there will determine your resident status and where you're going to have to file taxes to. So that's a pretty complicated thing, because you want to make sure that when you file, you don't file double taxes, and you want to declare your income if you have to, and you don't want to avoid like the proper procedure to actually declare your taxes. So that's a tough one. Um, Aside from that, I guess time zone is always an issue. I've been in 2 time zones. So I lived in Australia for a while, and that was rough.
Ooh,
Although
yeah.
we have a coworker that lives in Korea, and that works better for him, although that's a few hours different than Australia. For me, it was too hard. I couldn't have lasted, because it was depending on daylight savings time. It was either 2 a.m. to 10 a.m. or 4 a.m. to 12. And
Wow.
so you know, you have to talk with your company, see if they can maybe move your hours a bit to something that works better. But even if they do, sometimes it just doesn't work out. The other time zone I lived in, I lived in South Africa, but it's the same time zone as France. So this time zone, when I first moved here, I worked the hours, like Colorado hours. And so it was like 5 p.m. my time to 1 a.m. And honestly, I liked it because I'm a night person. I hate the mornings anyway. The shared office space. I've been at a lot of different shared office spaces, a lot, and and it empties out. They empty out at 5 o'clock, so I had the whole shared office space to myself for 8 hours every single day. So honestly, it was one of the best experiences. On the flip side, after a while, you start to feel kind of like you don't belong in any place, because so it depends on what country you're gonna want to stay in. In my case, so I live in France. I find myself not integrating into French culture, and I find myself not even being American anymore. So I spend all my days speaking English, working for an American company, and then I don't end up actually integrating myself to French society. So that's a difficult one. You kind of have to weigh. You have to I guess you have to kind of be aware of that when you do travel. If you change your hours, it's going to be tough because then you're going to have to, the communication is very hard if you're only overlapping for a few hours. If you keep the same hours, then something simple like, hey, I want to go to dinner, you have to take the time off and mark it on your calendar.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world. It's just it's something you have to keep in mind, right? It becomes a weird thing like, oh, I want to go out to dinner or I want to go to see a show. Okay, well, I have to mark out of office now on the calendar because those are work hours, not work hours. And it's sometimes easy to get wrapped up in like chores, odds and ends and errands during the day, and then by the time you actually sit down to work, you're tired. It's because you had a full day before you even start work. So
Yeah.
it's also something to keep in
Interesting.
mind.
So just to kind of give our listeners, a picture of the landscape, right? They may not know that Atten is and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong here, but a Colorado-based design and digital agency, correct?
Yes.
Right. You guys are shaking your head. Okay. And is everybody remote, or is there's an office in Colorado? Is that correct?
You know, we're a fully distributed workforce right now. We've
Okay.
at the end of the pandemic, Atten took a look at its use of its office space, and Atten had offices forever that were home to a lot of the Denver Drupal community. You know, they would host events and so on. And finally, came to the conclusion that it's not providing the benefits to our people and our clients that perhaps it used to. And so now Atten maintains an office at WeWork downtown. So anytime we want to have that community and that connection, we can go in and well, those of us who are on this continent can pop in and work there. And
or visiting, right?
What's it? Yeah, what's that?
Or
visiting
visiting the
too, yeah.
Yes,
continent.
of course. Exactly. Visiting the continent. So, yeah, but other than that, we are fully distributed. And we've got people,
Okay.
in Illinois and Korea and Paris, and I worked
Okay.
from Spain for a little while last summer, and
Awesome.
Okay.
the advantage that I love the fact that I could start my work 9:30 or 11, go for coffee in a relaxed manner, and then by the time I'm finishing up my work, it's about 8 p.m., which is almost dinner time in Spain. And the earliest risers in Atten, have only been on for just a little while. So
Sorry, Alan, a question on kind of the working hours, right? So is the idea that you guys are kind of working on a rolling kind of global work clock, or is it like, hey, everybody's going to try to work, Colorado hours if possible, or some overlap there, so that way, the team's kind of all online at the same time?
Yeah, so Atten wasn't always completely distributed. Actually, when I first started working, I was the first remote employee. And I remember having a conversation in my interview, and they said, so does it bother you that, for example, we're all going to go out, for drinks like this Friday? Does that bother you? And I don't know how I answered it, but I remember thinking in my head, no, not at all, because I'm not social and I have no problem not going out for drinks on Friday. So it took a while to go through the transition of actually being completely remote, but now we all are. And I think it's a matter of what hours work best for everybody. I know that I went through transition too with my boss and with the president of the company to talk about, because I was working Denver hours and I was like, this is not sustainable. I need to switch. So we found a schedule that worked. I think it's what people just pick the hours that work for them, and as long as it works for them, and then stick to it. So like everybody has sent in which hours they're going to be available, and they just need to stick to that. That's the most important thing. It's not. I don't think it's really a matter of like we want to be open all the time or we want to be
Right.
like having rolling hours, but we don't want everybody to have to stick to the same hours. It's more just like I want to know when you're available and when you're not available, and I want to make sure that's consistent. And I
Yeah.
think that's been working pretty well. At least Google Calendar has that option now to say, when you have that little out of office thing. That's
Yep.
been it's been working okay.
I think one of the other things to consider too, which is on all sides, is you have to also, and I'm not sure you guys do this at Atten, but it might be something worth thinking about, is taking more advantage of the scheduling of messages that you kind of mentioned earlier, Alan. Because if you're,
Mhm.
when you were in Australia, if you're sending an email to somebody at 4 a.m. and they get a ding, that's disruptive. But if you can schedule that email to show up, 20 minutes before they start working or 20 minutes after they start working, whenever, like they're getting that timely information, you're sending them the updates or asking the questions you need to ask with no risk of interrupting. And the same
Yeah.
for you. Like if they're sending you messages at 4 a.m. Well, you said you are a night owl, so maybe you do like working at 1 a.m. or something. But you want to make sure that you're sending messages synchronously with the time frame of the person that is receiving it. Now, again, obviously, if you're sending a message to the whole company or to 10 people, you might not be able to do that if everybody's distributed. But trying to be courteous about that can be
Yeah,
helpful
I
too.
think that also goes a little bit to company culture and how the company communicates on as a whole, right? Because I know um, previous companies that I've worked for, when we kind of went to a distributed model, right? The idea was that when you ping somebody in Slack, there wasn't an expectation that they were going to get back to you right away, right? Because everybody's kind of working on different timetables. I would definitely use the scheduling feature in Slack if it wasn't like super important, or like I knew that that person was off for the day. Like I'd try to schedule stuff for later if possible. But I think one thing that I've always done is I've always had Slack or Teams on my phone, and I don't necessarily have a problem if somebody pings me with something to say like, hey, I will set the expectation like, hey, I will get back to you on this tomorrow, and then put it on my to-do list, and I'll get back to you when I'm actually working. But some people just don't, they don't want to be bothered when it's their time, and that's completely understandable. So yeah, I think using those scheduling features is great. But I also think like company expectation, like, hey, listen, we have an expectation here that like you're going to message somebody and they may not get back to you until they're in their working hours. Um, one
That's right.
other
Yeah.
one other thing that I thought was interesting, and I actually see this on my own team, is that as I said, most of my team is in Eastern Europe, and there's kind of a great little bit of overlap there where like I'm coming online as they're kind of wrapping up their day, and then my day is kind of over, and then they pick up notes and things that I've left during my day for them and kind of work through it, and we kind of have this nice flow. So I think if you're working remotely, especially internationally, or have folks in a bunch of different places, like if you can play kind of the world clock, it could be beneficial to you. But I think that has to be coupled with like some communication expectations that like, hey, you're gonna drop me a message and I'm not gonna get back to it until you're asleep at 3
Yeah.
a.m. or whatever the time frame is.
Okay, I'm gonna shift gears slightly. I've got a question for you guys. Have you guys worked for different sized companies remotely? And have you seen any impact there? Is it easier working for a larger company or a smaller company?
Me, I have not just worked for two relatively small companies, so can't really speak to what a larger company would be like.
Yeah, same for me. I've worked for small agencies exclusively, so I can't make that comparison. One thing that I think that clients and some colleagues actually get a kick out of, like, where are you today or where are you now? The
Hmm.
first remote work job I took was a temporary assignment and work remote. And I had been used to going into an agency here in Colorado. And I thought, I know exactly what this means to me. And I just went to Mexico. And I remember the first call that I had before too long. The I think it was with the agency, and the head of the agency said, "Jordan, do I hear chickens where you are?" I'm like, "Yes." And anyway, but what I found is that people are like, "Oh, where are you?" And that's kind of interesting and engaging.
Hmm.
And all else being equal, you have to be responsive. You have to set expectations and then stick to them, so that people can count on you. That's really important no matter what. But when you do that, I think that people are, to my experience, have been very supportive and actually kind of curious about where someone's working.
So one thing I will say, so I've worked for a smaller agency remotely, and now I work for a large company remotely. Um, I'd be interested to hear what you guys think, but I feel like you might have a little bit more flexibility in being able to say like, hey, I'm going to go work from Spain for 2 weeks, or hey, I'm going to go work from Italy for a month, when you're with a smaller company, just because um, the requirements, the rules may potentially be less. Obviously, as Alan said, like tax rules may apply, so on and so forth. But I know for us, um, when we travel, because we have company devices, the company likes to know where we're traveling to and if we're bringing our device. And if we go to certain places, they have certain rules and restrictions that we have to follow. So I think that's one of the things that maybe a larger company has more governance around.
Yeah.
As well as, but on the flip side, a larger company may also have more resources to kind of help with the tax stuff and the law stuff, and kind of making sure that if you decide, hey, I want to go, work from Italy for 6 months, like, oh, okay, well, here's what you need to do that, and here's the tax implications if you do that, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But I definitely think it's fun to be able to say, hey, I'm gonna travel for a little bit and be in a couple of different places, weekly or monthly, or however you work that out.
That's a good point, actually. My brother-in-law, for example, he lives in Barcelona, but he came to work in Paris, or actually just said he was going to be working in Paris. And his company said, wait a minute. Like, no, there's legal implications. Hold on, we have to okay you to go work in Paris. So apparently it really does depend. Like, you have to check with your company that there's any sort of bureaucratical.
Yeah, I also used to work with a company who required, like, their client required that their team be U.S. based. So like there could be implications there too, where like your client may contractually require your company to hire U.S. resources. So it's another thing to
That's actually
factor in.
true. There is a part of my contract, I believe, that could exempt me from some projects that I end. That's true.
Mhm.
And I have a funny story about that, but I don't know if we have time.
Oh, we definitely have time. We love funny stories. Do tell.
So a long time ago, before working remote was like very popular, I was at a cafe and I wasn't even working. I was just at a cafe.
Hold on, before you continue, I'm not going to get an angry email from Justin about this story, am I?
No, this is pre-Atten. Don't worry.
Oh,
I'm
okay. Okay,
I'm
good.
at
Great.
liberty to say.
There we go.
So I was
Company
at
X.
this
Got it.
cafe and I see this guy. He looked like, I guess, maybe a lawyer, maybe he was an accountant or something, and he's on the phone with a client. And I hear him talking, and he's got that look like, I'm so cool. I'm working from a cafe. This is great. Like, I have the life. Then all of a sudden I overhear the conversation and he's like, oh yeah, I'm at a cafe. And I hear the client on the phone ripping him a new one. How dare you work at a cafe? This is like very sensitive information. Don't you ever call from me from a cafe. Why don't you call me when you're back at the office? And I just see his face go from like smiling to like, yeah, you have to be careful where you do call your clients from. Sometimes they have a very, like they have an expectation of like you're not overseas at some cafe on your laptop. So that is
Yeah.
definitely true. I just remember laughing.
Public Wi-Fi people
That's
use
fun.
VPN. That's the that's the
He was
standard
on his
there.
cell phone, so he
Yeah.
wasn't even
Oh,
using
yeah.
VPN, no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is interesting because whatever they were talking about, other people could probably hear that. We've kind of talked about why you guys like working remotely and what you think is great about it. And we've all talked about like being able to put in a load of laundry. Jordan,
Wait,
don't
I need to jump in here and point out actually that it's been a very, very long time since I've done laundry during work hours. I was just thinking this because we use this example so often. My short break chores are usually letting Kitako out into the backyard, or letting him in from the backyard, or making lunch.
For those of
I'm
you
not.
that don't know, that's Nick's dog.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me edit my previous statement. So for you, we've talked about letting our dogs out and doing laundry. Jordan, don't forget you need to
Thanks.
move your laundry over.
Thanks.
I'm wondering specifically why each of you like working from home. If there's something outside of that, like outside of that ability to be able to like move the laundry.
I guess I'll go first. Ironically, I actually do prefer shared office spaces. So,
Hmm.
um, and I've had some really good experiences where I had one that was right across the street from me, but then it closed down. So it's actually what I kind of prefer. But second to that, I do like working from home because, I can slip in and out pretty easily and I get
Yeah.
distracted. I mean, I have ADHD, so just like my entire brain is at constant distraction all the time. And
Yeah.
it's some days where it's actually more productive to embrace the distractions. So like if I see something, I'll just go do it, get the distraction over with, and then come back. And
Hmm.
I wouldn't be able to do that if I wasn't at home.
Just
And
out of
also,
curiosity, Alan, do you like the shared workspace because it gives you that like that buffer or that split between like home life and work life?
that's it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's the most important to me. Is the best experiences I've had was when I have like, and to what Jordan said, there's a threshold, right? So if you have to travel an hour to get to a shared office space, that defeats the purpose.
Right.
But the shared office spaces are generally, it depends on the city you live in, but they're generally pretty, plentiful. They're all over the place. So you find one that's super close to you. And for me, like 15-minute walk was perfect. So
Hmm.
I like the separation, and I've lived in some very, very, very small apartments. So, you know, it actually serves as a double bonus because if your apartment's too small to set up a station to work, you know that when you go back home, your day is over. And so when you're at the office, it's just mentally, you have to get more stuff done. So that I think that is yeah, the buffer I think is very important in my case.
Interesting.
Yeah, and as far as working remotely, working from home is part of that, but also, the co-work space is fantastic. I live in a suburb in the Denver area, and to get to the co-work space that Atten uses would be about 45 minutes or more of driving. So it's rare for me. It's great to go in and see people, but it's rare for me. But being able to work remotely from wherever I need to be has like last October I went and visited my mom and took her to her house in the woods and she hadn't been to in the winter time for a long time and that was just before she died. And so, like for me, that's a huge benefit that I was able to go and spend that time, and take a break and make some lunch for her or whatever it was. So that I think there's more life to life
Hmm.
when I'm not bound to an office.
Yeah, you have that flexibility, and one of the great things to come out of this mass like migration to remote work is that it kind of proved once and for all that productivity doesn't drop. Most companies saw a productivity increase. There obviously was a transition period, right? When companies had to figure out how to get equipment to people and how to, securely connect to the VPN and increase those resources. There was a transition period, but once that transition was done, most companies saw productivity go up.
Yeah, I think that productivity. I think that there is a corporate culture around that. But as far as corporate culture goes, one of the things that I loved about Atten when we had an office is the snacks. Man, Atten had the best snack game. There were proteins, there were salts, there were chocolates, a couple of beers in the fridge. Anything you could want and I really was like, oh God, I'm going to miss the snacks. And so one of the things that Atten does, I don't know if they do this for Alan across the pond as he is, but periodically Atten will send us an email and it's like, here's $40 for the boutique, snack website. Go
Oh,
and buy
nice.
yourself some snacks. And so,
They
I mean,
did,
there's a
yeah.
couple of things there. One, it's a really nice gesture. It's nice to have that in the house, but it ties us back to our origin story. Like back in the day when we had this incredible snack kitchen.
Hmm.
My cat actually uses the boxes. I get a cool selection of Spanish snacks, Italian snacks, all kinds of stuff. Our
Oh, that's
selections are different, but because I think they
Nice,
third party it out to some European company. But then my
nice.
cat is obsessed with the box now. Like that's his place. Actually, that kind of reminds me too. Kind of reminds me of some bonuses that I never mentioned before, but are extremely important to me. Just probably seem stupid though. One is like I drink a lot of coffee, or it's not that I even drink a lot of coffee. I just drink a coffee in a particular way. So I like to grind my own beans because I'm a super coffee snob. And I always found that very uncomfortable to do at an office. Like either I'm actually grinding it or I'm grinding a new cup. And then, the whole process is like it's my process of doing coffee. And the other thing is clipping my nails, which is like I
That is
if I
that
have
one.
long nails,
The coffee thing I can get behind. The clipping the nail, that's something that like you should not be doing in an office.
you're never gonna do that in an office, but if I have long nails, I cannot type, and it bothers me the whole day. So if, like, I could just go over to the bathroom, clip my nails, and come back, like, you just can't do that as in an office,
Yeah.
and, any
Without
private
being
bathroom
that
is
guy. Yeah, you can't do
huge
that without
without
being
being
a
that
bit.
guy. Like,
Yeah.
so if, like, I wanna brush my teeth, for example, or I wanna clip my nails or something, it's
Yeah.
just, like it seems like such a stupid thing, but when you're at an office and you're stuck there all day, it's just one of those things that drain on me, and it bothers me for the whole day. Like I hate the feeling of dirty teeth or something, or I hate the
Yeah.
feeling of long nails, and it gets in the way. I mean, when you're typing behind a keyboard, it doesn't take much for something to distract you and get in the way.
Yeah.
So like having a private bathroom that's right over there is a luxury that I don't think I can. I don't think I can go without. Even if I went back to an office, I'd still want a couple days a week at
Mm.
home.
Yeah, and like John said, I think the coffee thing has become a bit more like there's more of a culture, especially with the developers being huge fans of coffee, right? But grinding your own beans, I think, would be a huge distraction for other people in the office. So yeah,
Oh, it
it's
was.
big,
Yeah.
it's a big benefit to be able to do those kinds of things. And people think that grinding your own beans, making a cup of coffee, doing that kind of stuff is time consuming. It takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes to make that cup of coffee. It's a good, nice little break and come back refreshed. So yeah, good good points. So with all these benefits, I'm curious about your opinions. Maybe we'll start with you, Alan. Why do you think, and I'm glad to hear that Atten is not one of these companies, but why do you think so many companies are trying to really push people back into the office?
Yeah. Honestly, I think that's capitalism being capitalism, to be honest. I think it's probably, and I mean, from what I read in the news, it's companies like Disney, Google, Amazon. I find Google the most ironic. They're the ones who invented Google Hangouts, and yet for some reason think that their employees can't use it to actually do their jobs. I find that heavily ironic. But I think, and I've never been in a big company before, but I think that the bigger the company is, the more disconnect there is between executive and the actual employees, and the harder it is to maintain a sensation of control over your employees and a trust. I think the harder it is to feel like you have trust in your employees because if you like whether the employees in an office or not in an office, you should know if they're being productive or not. And if you don't, I think that's on you. Like it's like watching Office Space, the famous movie where he comes in and he's like, "Oh, well, I just stare at my desk for 15 minutes. It looks like I'm working." Like, that's an example of you can be at the office and not be productive at all. So, like,
Yeah.
the illusion of having your employees in the office and thinking you have control over their productivity is just that, it's an illusion. So, like, I think it's on these executives and the upper management and their disconnect of why they think plus I think a lot of I think a lot of CEOs, I think a lot of executives have a better experience in the office. I think they have really nice office spaces. I think they have a lot of control over what happens. They feel like the hierarchy is there, it's in your face. And then I also think that there's a lot of there's a lot of connection between them and like the leasing offices, and it's
Yeah.
connected to their stocks, and like there's an investment, there's a capitalistic investment in leasing offices losing a ton of money with rent. So like it's just all intertwined too much in a sense that I think the smaller companies like Atten are going to make the decision based on their employees, whereas the other companies are going to make the decision based on income and money and maybe a false sense of control. That's
Yeah.
my impression of it. I don't see like I see companies that are making the decision, and it's very hard for them. And went through a few years of making that decision. I remember being asked several times. We talk about it at a lot of summits. It was always a question of, "Hey, what does everybody think about us going remote?" And we really talked about it. They took our opinion seriously. There was never a force either way. So the companies, to me, the companies that are forcing people, it's like so obvious that it doesn't have anything to do with the employees or
Yeah.
their interest in the health of their employees.
I think you said everything there is to be said about that. I agree completely. I think a lot of it has to do with maybe sunk cost fallacy with like property, like they're worried about that value going down and that sense of control. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for me, it feels more like a managerial problem. And like, if I can see you at your desk, you're working, right? And I also think that it's a two-way street, right? I think that there are some jobs that can't necessarily be done without being in an office, right? So,
yeah,
That's
you
true.
know,
I believe that too. Yeah.
I think sales jobs, for example, where you're selling a product or you're selling event space or something like that. It's hard to meet with a client and show them something when you're on Zoom or you're not
yeah,
actually there, right? So you need to make that connection, and sometimes making that connection remotely is difficult. Um, but I do agree that um, I do agree that the managerial thing is like, from a managerial standpoint, we have to shift our thinking, and to like, hey, I'm going to trust that my employee is doing their job, and I'm going to check in with their client and check in with their team and like evaluate that they're doing their job, right? And if everything's getting done and everything's good, then okay, great. If it's
yeah,
not good, we're going to have a conversation about it, right? And I think a lot of a lot of kind of like old school air quotes, I'm using air quotes, are managers don't feel like they can do that remotely.
yeah. And to John's point, it's not even just some jobs that are better done in person. That there's some tasks that are better done in person, right? I
Hmm.
find, for example, I find one of the more difficult things to accomplish remotely, even after doing this long, is kind of blue sky brainstorming. Like if you're trying to come up with a
Mm.
new product or new application or a completely new solution to something or new UX for something, having just a group of all the architects in a room together with a whiteboard is one of the most efficient ways to get the best product, I think.
Yep.
And some of
Totally
that
agree.
is yeah, and some of that isn't even just the idea portion of it, but some of it is kind of the empathy, like that empathy that you kind of lose sometimes behind a screen, right? Or like the um I guess the communication, the nonverbal communication cues or something. Like if you're in a
Yep.
room with a bunch of people, you're trying to come up with some ideas, you can pick up on cues that somebody has an idea, but they're not comfortable speaking up or breaking in, right? And you can like speak up for them, like, "Hey, what's your idea?" right? And get other perspectives. Whereas if you're on Zoom, especially if you don't have a camera on, the people that may be more shy or unsure if they should speak up will just go the whole meeting just listening or typing out responses, and you won't get
Yep.
their valuable insight. So
Yeah.
that's one area where I think, but the solution is regular check-ins,
Yep.
maybe a co-working space like Atten did, that kind of stuff, and
So
maybe regular summits.
I think two points there. One is directly related, and one is on what we were talking about previously, right? So, Nick, I think you're right. Sometimes things are better done in a room, right, with people. I think sometimes that's hard though, depending on how your team is distributed around
Yeah.
the globe, right? I think things like Miro have made it easier to kind of do those. You can all jump on a communication tool of your preference and jump in a Miro board and be able to have the kind of a similar experience. But the social cues is interesting. I actually sent somebody just this morning. I sent somebody a message that was meant to be a compliment, and they replied back with, "I think you're being sarcastic, but I appreciate I appreciate this." And I replied like, "No, no, no, no. I'm being 100% sincere here. Like I do think that this is true, and I appreciate you for it." And sometimes things get lost in translation. Um,
Yeah, John,
the
I think you would benefit from the sarcasm font more than most people. You're or
I
your messages should always just append that auto like I am being completely sincere in this because yeah, I mean I've seen your comments
I
the I know
I
you're being
do
sincere and they get misinterpreted and you
I
have to
do have
clarify
a
that.
bit of a sarcastic streak, which, when I'm being sincere, kind of
Yeah.
torpedoes that quite a bit. The other thing that I think, going back to like managers changing the way they think about things, is like I think companies have to change the way they think about things a little bit too, because a lot of what um, I have noticed over the course of the last, I don't know, we'll say 10 years, is that when you're expected as a remote employee or an employee in general to file 8 hours of time a day, right? I think that can sometimes dictate like where you do that time, right? Like, hey, if you're not in the office for 8 hours, you're not actually being productive and doing your job. As where um, you have the ability as a remote employee to say, hey, I'm going to do 3 hours right now, and then I got to go do something for an hour, and then I'm going to come back and do another 3 hours, and then I got to eat dinner with my family, and then I'm going to do another 2 hours tonight, right? So you can kind of get that 8 hours in. And in most cases, I think what people don't realize is that remote employees probably spend more time working than people that might necessarily be punching a clock in the office.
Which I think is a problem. I think people should be able to work
It is and it
the
isn't,
time that they
right?
have.
Like I think it's, if you enjoy what you're doing, right, and you can make the mental case to say like, hey, I'm going to do this work because like, that's what I need to be doing. Whether it takes you 8 hours or 8.5 hours, or it takes you 7.5 hours, like as long as you're getting the job done, like I don't necessarily, and you're enjoying it, I don't necessarily know that it ever is necessarily work. But yes, I don't think people should overwork, I guess, is what I'm trying to get to there. So let's bring this in for a landing here, this show. And let me ask each of you, I will start with Jordan. What do you miss about working in an office? I know we talked about snacks, but you kind of got that one covered. But is there anything else that you're like, I wish I worked in an office because of?
Yeah, the two things that come to mind for me are just the social opportunities. Go grab a coffee, go out for, have a sandwich or something for lunch with someone. So the social aspect I really miss. And living in Colorado, there's a really long season in which commuting by bicycle makes sense.
Mhm.
And I've been a huge cyclist, and the longest commute I've ever had was to Atten's office. It was 29 miles each way,
Oh,
and
wow.
Wow.
which, you know, if it's 95 degrees and it's time to ride home and you're still tired from the morning, like that is a long ride home. But there's no better way to get to work, and I honestly really miss bike commuting to work.
Hmm. So let me ask you, Jordan, before I switch to Alan here, the social aspect, right? I found for me that when I went to like remote, it actually opened up my ability to have like social interactions with the people I actually wanted to have social interactions with, right? So like
Mhm.
when you're going to an office, sometimes there are those social interactions where you're like, oh, Tommy's at the coffee machine again. Like either I don't get a coffee or I have to just like grit my teeth and do it. Do you find that to be accurate?
For me, first of all, I love the people that I work with, and so there's nobody cringeworthy whom I would have wanted to avoid. And for me, it expands the list of people that I would interact with. Naturally, I'm still going to interact with friends and family. But yeah, having colleagues to go grab a coffee with, these are people that, on a weekend I wouldn't ever spend time with them. And so for me, it expanded the pool of people that I would interact with.
Got it. So, Alan, let me ask you the same question. What do you miss about working in an office?
So the social interaction, I think, is 50-50 for me. I have had times where I talk to people I wouldn't necessarily talk to. That's nice. On the flip side, it can be distracting sometimes. So I don't know. I think it evens out for me. I think the thing I miss the most, to be honest, is people asking me for advice that I know are not reaching out online for whatever reason, and vice versa. So me reaching out to somebody who could just be sitting next to me, I'm just going to be not as likely to do that online for whatever reason. There's a bunch of different reasons, but I know that I feel more included. I feel, and I think we get more knowledge sharing done in an office. So I do miss that the most. You feel kind of like everybody's around, and I mean, like, I don't know about you all, but I talk to myself as I program. So people around me are going to know what I'm working on and what I'm going to have trouble with. And a lot of other people do the same thing, or you could see their screen and you can see what they're having trouble with. So we're more connected in that sense. And there's a lot more isolating in terms of, and I've seen it happen. I've seen people post, oh, here was my solution to this on the Slack channel. And I think to myself, I've literally done that. I've done it. I don't want to say this, but I've done it better. And I worked on that for a very long time. And I wish they had asked me, but they didn't. So
Yeah.
it's just like we're kind of isolated, and if we were in the same office, I'm sure that they would have looked over to me and been like, hey, how do you do this? Super quick, right?
Yep.
And I'd have been like, oh, yeah, let me go walk over to your computer and say that. That's one of
Yeah.
the things that I like about an office.
It's super interesting because you do have those social cues. Like you're like, hey, somebody's wearing their headphones. Okay, they must be deep into something. I'm not going to bother them. Or like, hey, just pop your head over the monitor and be like, hey, you ever have a problem with this? Oh yeah, I have. Here's how I fix it. Okay, cool. Right.
Exactly.
It's a lot harder to gauge that via Slack or via like, those other tools for connecting. Well, Alan and Jordan, thank you for joining us. Jordan, thank you for joining us for the last 4 weeks. It's been a pleasure having you and having you both.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really
Thanks.
appreciate it.
Do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
Get the Talking Drupal newsletter for show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and much more. Sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
Thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and clicking that big Become a Patron button in the sidebar. All right. Now, if our listeners wanted to get a hold of you gentlemen, Alan, how could they go about doing that?
Hey, Sherry on Drupal, or, send me an email at atten.io.
There you go.
I hate Twitter. I'm barely ever on it. So
That's fine. There's no requirement here for that. Jordan, thank you again for joining us for the last 4 weeks. And if folks
My
wanted
pleasure.
to get a hold of you, how could they do it?
On Drupal.org, I'm CO Badger. So that's the best way, using the contact form.
Nick, thank you for joining us for the last 399-ish episodes. If folks wanted to get a hold of you, how could they do it?
You can get in touch with me at NixFan, NICXVAN, pretty much everywhere.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out more about EPAM at epam.com.
If you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking.
There you go.
See you guys
Thank
next
you
week.
very much.